Next, we have our panel discussion. The moderator for our panel is the Director of California's Department of Developmental Services, Nancy Bargman. Nancy, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Eric. And I look forward to joining this hour with everyone and appreciate the invitation to be able to moderate for this very esteemed panel. And I want to again introduce myself. I'm Nancy Bargman, Director of the Department of Developmental Services. Today I am joining you. For description, I'd like to just share that in my background, I do have a picture of beautiful trees that is surrounding the Capitol. And on my photo, it shows an extremely blue sky. And I am a white female, and I'm wearing a pink jacket, and I am wearing glasses, and I have a white shirt. And I am, again, extremely pleased as we have our panel introduce themselves. You will also note just the extreme expertise that we have on our panel today, and I'm very humbled to be in their presence. So I will share with you also that I've had the distinct honor of working with each of these individuals and find them to be incredible leaders, not only in the area of having the passion and commitment to system change and addressing service access and inequity issues, but also in lifting up the importance and the value of employment, particularly for the individuals who have disabilities and really are change agents in how we move forward as a system. So I'm going to go ahead and have our panel members introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Dr. Olivia Rayner.
Hi, good morning, and I'm very honored to be on this panel this morning and build upon the outstanding remarks that were made preceding our panel. My name is Olivia Rayner. I direct the Tarjan Center at UCLA. We are a university center for excellence in developmental disabilities and one of a network of 67 centers around the country. I'll explain a little bit more perhaps as we get into our remarks, but our charge really is teaching, training, innovative services and supports, research, information dissemination, and education to policy makers to support people with disabilities in their pursuit of independence, community inclusion, and productivity. I myself am a blonde-haired, brown-eyed female who uses the pronouns she and her. I'm in my early 60s, wearing it proudly, and wearing today a golden beige blouse and tan jacket. Behind me is a blurred image of a very full office. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. And Director Kim McCoy-Wade.
Good morning. I'm Kim McCoy-Wade. I am the Director of the California Department of Aging and the convener with Secretary Mark Galley of the Master Plan for Aging process. I'm calling you this morning from my home on Patwood Land in Northern California. My pronouns are any. I normally say that I'm 6 feet tall, although I'm not sure that's that helpful on a Zoom call. But I am a 50-year-old white woman with short curly hair, blue glasses. I think my pink shirt matches your jacket, Nancy, with a black jacket. So pleased to be here this morning.
Thank you, Kim. And Director Joe Xavier.
Good morning, Nancy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, good morning to everyone. It's great to be here today. Joe Xavier, Director for the Department of Rehabilitation. I am a white male. I have no idea what the color of my hair is. Some say it's black, some say it's salt and pepper, wearing shirt, tie, slacks. And I describe that to you because I am blind. I am an immigrant to this country. and I reflect the community that we serve here at the Department of Rehabilitation. So often we talk about our mission and our vision, but what I think is important for you to hear today is that we specialize in the belief and the talent and potential of every individual with disability to pursue, gain, and retain a family-sustaining wage. I come to you today from my office here in downtown Sacramento, and this is the setting that we want every individual with a disability to be in, the workplace, truly able to provide for themselves and their families. Looking forward to today's panel conversation and engaging with all of you.
Thank you, Joe. Extremely pleased to welcome and invite Wesley Witherspoon to introduce himself as a great representative of the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. Wesley?
Hi, my name is Wesley Witherspoon. I'm a Black middle-aged male with, I got polka dot black and white. And I look forward to talking about employment for people of color.
Thank you, Wesley. And also, certainly not last, because we have more to talk about today, but very pleased to have Heather join us as the Director of Special Ed. And welcome, Heather. Can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Nancy. Good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here in such an exciting event and time. I am a Black middle-aged person. I'm wearing a black shirt and I have short black hair. I joined the California Department of Education in August of 2020, right smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, and have really enjoyed my time in getting to know the community in California. And as you know, there are just over 800,000 students with disabilities, birth through 22 across the state. And so I am really looking forward to the conversation ahead. And I think, like Joe, just really share the belief that, you know, our students come to us already a brilliant, amazing, and you know, really looking forward to, I think, capitalize on our strengths, skills, and talents of our youth in order to continue to push them forward, and recognizing that the systems that we work within and you know, and connect to are critically important for all of our youth and all of our adults across the state as well. So again, thank you, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Heather. So as our esteemed presenters and speakers prior to our panel have noted and talked about the diversity of California, we really do have such a remarkable state, and the benefit of our state is the diversity of our population and our neighbors. So according to, just by way of a little bit of background, according to the 2019 American Communities Survey, that there's really no race that constitutes the majority of California's population. But as noted, it does represent the diversity of our state. So when we look at the report, it reports out that 39% of the state residents are Latinx, 36% are white, 15% are Asian or Pacific Islander, 6% are African American, fewer than 1% are Native American or Alaska Natives, and 3% are multiracial or other. So given the diversity, and looking at the racial and ethnic groups of California, I'm going to ask Olivia to start, and then we'll go to Kim after this. How have you and maybe your department and the work that you have done embraced the intersectional identities of California within your work and the efforts and initiatives that you've embraced? Olivia?
So thank you for that important question. And we certainly know that COVID has disproportionately affected the racial ethnic minority communities as well as the disability community. And it has really magnified the existing disparities in equitable distribution of resources and health, employment, and education. And I think I also need to situate myself that I am a program within a very large, I'm at the University of California, Los Angeles. It's a very large public university and is also making very intentional efforts in addressing important issues related to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm very proud that the university is inclusive of people with disabilities as part of their conversations and efforts in improving our ability to create a more inclusive academic, teaching, research, service environment. We know, however, the Tarzan Center, again, is just one small entity within essentially the Semel Institute, which is the Department of Psychiatry within the university. And we have an opportunity to bring attention to the fact that the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, placing a primary value on the lived experience of people with disabilities, and that should serve as a sort of focal point for the research training that goes on within our programs. Within the Tarzan Center, I just wanted to highlight that we held two stakeholder focus groups. One, a wonderful group of self-advocates. Wesley was a part of that conversation. Maybe he can make mention of it later, as well as a second group of community partners. And each were very intentionally selected to be a part of this conversation so that we could benefit and make improvements within our program, but also be able to be aware of the priorities within the community for making change. And what we heard is not going to be surprising. The number one actual statement was that they felt that they're not heard and that there's an undervaluing of the lived experience of disability, that the intersections between disability and race need to be elevated, and that certainly when those intersections occur, that the people with disabilities are the most disproportionately impacted, again, whether it's within health or education or employment. And that we need to pay attention to the structural barriers to access, specifically access to services, supports, and accommodations. And the ways that we're responding to these issues is really what was highlighted, I think, in the conversations that have preceded our presentation, our panel today, which is that we really need to authentically engage with our communities. Collaboration is really at the hallmark of what we're going to be able to do to be able to move the bar and be more inclusive in the work that we do. And importantly, place people with disabilities from diverse backgrounds in important leadership positions. So they're not just the recipients of our ideas, but that they're moving the bars themselves in making change. And lastly, I am from a university, and data is key to all that we ask for, and that the agencies and those that are responsible for moving the bar are transparent with the information, resources, and data that they have that actually show that their efforts are making changes to make systems more accessible and open to diverse individuals with disabilities.
Thank you, Olivia. Kim, Olivia pointed out some really key and important points, and you bring a wonderful perspective and leadership within the Department of Aging. So hearing Olivia, can you add on from the perspective as a department, and then certainly leaning into the opportunities for building on leadership within our diverse community, particularly individuals with disabilities?
Yes, absolutely. When we began the master plan for aging with stakeholders like DRC and independent living centers at the table, the question came up right away about how is the master plan for aging inclusive and intersectional? And we did spend some time really leaning into how disability and aging are connected and how they are not. But just to name it, right, that people with disabilities are aging. Many people who are older are either living with or going to acquire disabilities, about 40% as part of aging. And that many of the services and supports, whether it's accessible transportation, accessible employment, today's focus, adult day centers are benefits to both communities. And of course, many people, as Professor Fernando Torres Gil always says, are both. So we knew we had intersectionality at the beginning. I will really commend our stakeholders who said to us about 3 months in, we have not centered race enough, and really called on us to have an equity task force that really did center race and developed an equity tool. And by race, I mean racial justice, racial equity. And as we dove in, we realized that the conversation of age and disability and race was so rich. One, there were amazing cultural traditions around aging that we needed to do a better job of listening to and honoring and bringing to the table. Native American aging traditions, African American elders, cultural respect. There's different beliefs around aging, which is what makes California great, and we can learn so much from. Some of our cultures have negative stereotypes about aging and disability that we can leave behind if we really learn from the cultural tapestry. And we also knew that there are different preferences in different communities. Some people, as they age, very much want to stay under one roof or stay in a couple nearby roofs, multifamily housing, whereas others are more comfortable with some community living facilities. And really understanding the preferences of our different communities as they age and as their parents age is really important. And then thirdly, we have to name the cumulative effects of a lifetime of discrimination on health and economics in particular, and what that means as you face your later years with a disability. Do you have the same chance for health and economic stability? And so we really leaned in to try to be intentional about how people have multiple identities that all impact their ability to age well with employment and all other issues. And I think that's why we came up with our tweak on the governor's tagline, California for All, is California for all ages, because we want to embed equity in any work around age and disability from the beginning. As our Assembly Member Cheryl Brown always says, don't sprinkle it on at the end, bake it in from the beginning. And we try to take
Thank you, Kim. And one of the things that I've always enjoyed on being on meetings with Heather is, Heather, don't play poker, because when you agree with something, you definitely show your body kind of like reacts to it. And so I'm going to go to you next. And Kim had shared, the opportunity for all and all ages. And so let's go to the younger kids as well. And particularly one of the areas, and it was just noted, during COVID, there was, we had a shift as a California, and then working with individuals, we had to move to remote services, and it presented really great opportunities for those who thrived working remote, learning remote, but it also presented really the visibility into the digital divide. Can you share, Heather, from your perspective and experience, both not only how you've been able to work within the very diverse communities, and then also the experience and what you're learning and where you're able to focus on the issue of digital divide?
Sure, Nancy, I think you're referring to me jumping out of my seat is typically my style for getting excited around questions. But jokes aside, I think really what obviously COVID surfaced is something that we've known sort of all along, right? I think and at that point, in terms of really understanding that whether a student in terms of matter of a geographic location or a zip code, the ability for a student to essentially access their curriculum, their school community and their peers has been greatly diminished because of just the lack of internet technology, or what I call or what I term as sort of the I think technology sort of literacy, right? It's great that, you know, our students and our families in the community have technology, but oftentimes I think sort of the next step is to ensure that, you know, that our communities are, you know, have equipment and are able to then access and manipulate and use that equipment as well. And so that, you know, really for us is a critical point. And I know, you know, the California Department of Education has 2 or 3 times during the course of COVID, you know, partnered, you know, with you know, I think gracious, you know, corporations across the state to really, you know, in those deserts, provide, you know, hotspots and technology to further connect communities. But I think, you know, absent of that, and also in addition to that, you know, ensuring that you know, conversations are kept open, particularly with our family empowerment centers, as I've often found, you know, working more closely with our family empowerment centers across the state, you know, really helps give CDE a direct line in terms of having those conversations directly with parents, advocates, community members to really learn, you know, you know, as others have stated, the lived experience during this time. And so, you know, really ensuring that, you know, again, those lines are open, in addition to supporting the superintendent's initiative on, you know, sort of combating the digital divide has been helpful. You know, I think there's certainly, you know, as you know, as you've noted before, just in terms of some of the gaps, I think an area that we, you know, should continue to explore is students who perhaps need assistive technology or augmentative communication, right? In sort of a virtual or a distance learning scenario. And you know, again, recognizing that, you know, there are, you know, unique challenges that oftentimes presented in that setting as well. But, you know, our department is certainly committed to continuing to dialogue with our partners, both externally and internally, to, I think, raise and surface the conversation as well.
Thank you, Heather. Wesley, State Council has prioritized a number of really important areas, and in their state plan, certainly the last 5-year plan and with the draft going forward, employment has been a priority. We know for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities that they're underrepresented in the workforce in employment. And certainly COVID has had an increased impact on the unemployment. We also know that we see that depending on the agencies, that we are seeing a real diverse approach or inequity of access to services between our white community and those receiving services, and those within our Black and Brown communities that are receiving less services. So first, I'd like to ask, what are you seeing as priorities as we build back better in employment for the individuals who have disabilities, particularly those within our Black and Brown communities?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bergman. So what's going on with our communities? We're trying to get people of color involved in the process, and we had to get them involved while they're in school. When I was involved with what you said, we actually went to a school in South LA, and as we was walking to the school, there was a shooting, and it was very hard. Life could be very hard for people of color because they go through circumstances which is very hard. So state agencies need to collaborate with each other. They need to go out into the community where people of color congregate and start talking to people. Places like the regional center, independent living centers, and community centers. The self-advocate's voice in designing services is important. Ask them what they want. This is the most important part of the picture. It's important to give options because everyone needs something different: part-time, full-time, apprenticeship, or volunteer work. There's infinite possibilities. I cannot name them all. What works for one person may not work for another. It is important to realize that people lose confidence after being rejected. So myself personally, when I came out of college, I got so many different rejections, and it just destroys your confidence when you're rejected so many different times. Employment is like a relationship. Sometimes it does not work out. You do not marry the first person you go out with. So when you're in school, the very first person you see, most likely you're not going to marry that very first person. So the reality is people might not stay in a job for long, maybe 3 years. They may need to try different jobs to find their career path. Thank you very much, Mr. Bergman.
Well, thank you, Wesley, for your great wisdom. And so, Olivia, going with Wesley's wisdom, when we look at opportunities for accessing education and higher education for individuals with all types of disabilities, and what are the things that you look at or recommend that we can really build upon in supporting the leadership and the opportunity for the higher education that can be a pathway going forward to employment?
So first, I'd like to give a shout out to the Department of Education for convening a new task force, or actually a work group that's looking at a pathway for high school students who are categorized as moderate to severe in the educational world for a pathway to a high school diploma, because we know that the one of the first check boxes that people have to fill out when they're filling out an application for employment is whether or not they have a high school application. As many know, I've been involved for decades in advocacy and work, also in partnership with the Department of Rehabilitation to advance post-secondary education opportunities for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that really comes from a belief, and now being validated in research, that students with intellectual and developmental disabilities can succeed in a post-secondary setting like other students, as a preparatory way to secure more, be better prepared for future employment. We know that ending at high school alone, particularly for our students today who do not, for the majority with the moderate and severe students, do not receive, they receive an alternate, they're on an alternate curriculum and they're receiving certificates of completion, that it makes it very difficult to say they're qualified for jobs other than low-skilled positions. So what we aspire for essentially is a higher education system that embraces students with IDD in the same way that our high schools and other schools are providing a free and appropriate education. Thanks to the Department of Rehabilitation, 8 community colleges today have college to career programs. And we're showing that with the right kinds of services and supports, not only are they on a pathway to employment, they are actually receiving the supports they need to succeed in inclusive academic classes. And let me say that again, these students are succeeding in inclusive academic classes in areas of their choice towards their vocational goals. And we've done that by adding on services and supports that in today's world do not fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act, in terms of the kinds of services and supports that should be provided to students. So I think that we really need to take a fresh look and be inclusive in our conversations of the higher education system, because we want to create better ways for students of the future to be prepared for the kind of work that's out there today. Jobs that involve critical thinking, problem solving, decision making, new learning, technology, and all of that is possible and happens within a college environment. Also, the social skills that we talk about that are so important for students to acquire, and the independence. And, that's really a practice ground for all youth. And I won't, for all youth to become more independent, to learn to live on their own and to self-advocate for what they need. So let's let that happen in a typical environment. And lastly, I want to say, not only are our college to career programs showing what's possible on a national level, on a federal level, the Higher Education Act has affirmed the opportunities for students with ID to go to college, and that California is the beneficiary of 3 model demonstration programs. And there's a national network of colleges supported by an entity called Think College that is increasingly demonstrating what the promise of education can be for our students. So that my call is really to engage in our conversations, higher education, and to create a pathway to future training and preparation for our students so that they can be authentically skilled workers of tomorrow.
Thank you, Olivia. Joe, Olivia had noted the great work from Department of Rehab. Can you share more about the work, particularly from the perspective of moving through higher education and the opportunities? And then I'm going to follow it up. The Secretary had shared what I see as very exciting, the partnership between Department of Rehab and Department of Developmental Services in our proposal this year. And is there an opportunity that we have there as we look at our pathway forward?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. All great, great comments here. So let me go to the end and come backward, particularly around the higher education and the work that CDE is doing with the IEP and diploma work groups, just invaluable. From this perspective, the end point for us here is what I said earlier, it's a family sustaining wage. And I think when we start with that framework as the end point and we map it backward, then everything that is occurring upstream is invaluable to prepare that individual for what will be needed downstream. So what Olivia just described around the higher education, if we're looking to get more individuals into the STEM careers, if we're looking to get more individuals into the professional careers, then having access to that education is invaluable. And absolutely applaud the thinking that the systems look at themselves and say, how can people navigate these systems, much like what CDE has done? And hopefully we'll hear more from Heather on, on that front as well. So that upstream piece and that readiness piece is invaluable. But in addition to what happens upstream and the readiness piece, and to the initiative that our collective, our 2 departments are working on hand in glove together, who does the hiring? And are they hiring people with disabilities into their workforce? So the initiative that Dr. Galley spoke of, the initiative that the Department of Developmental Services and DOR are working on, is really going to flip this paradigm on its head and say, let's address business and the business community from their lens, from their perspective, and help them understand a couple of different things that we believe will be impactful in hiring people with disabilities. Number one is shift it away from a social conscience, a charitable mindset to people with disabilities, their families and their friends reflect a large marketplace. And we need to see ourselves represented in the market so that our dollars are flowing to where that representation is there. So one of the things that we will be doing is establishing a campaign to promote the marketplace that people with disabilities bring to business. And 2, to lift up the employers, the businesses that do a good job of hiring people with disabilities, whose workforce reflect the community of disability. The second piece of that is to really say to business, really incentivize business, particularly at the small business level, to say, how can we help you remove any barriers to employment for people with disabilities, physical access, et cetera. And then we'll provide both some grants and some technical assistance to help change that. two other pieces that we will do in concert with that. One is to work with organizations such as the Society of Human Resource Managers, community colleges, where we can engage with executive level, leadership level of business, as well as the people that affect their hiring systems, and really help them understand the screening, help them understand the recruitment efforts, and change that paradigm so that they are seeing people with disabilities, true talent and potential, and help bringing them into their workforce. So there's a lot that we'll be developing on this initiative in the coming weeks, but it's really, at the end of the day, it's really shifting that paradigm of how we engage with business. The other part of this is the work, of course, Nancy, that you and your team do, especially for the ID, DD community, which is really getting them that exposure to the workplace. And Wesley, I'm going to borrow your line forever now. Employment is like a relationship. You don't marry the first person you date. And I think we forget that. I think a lot of times in employment, we think somebody goes into the job and all of a sudden that's their career. And I think what youth with disabilities really need is access to the workplace, experience to the different work. And so I'm really excited about some of the expansion of some of the initiatives that DDS has going on with this initiative. Nancy, hopefully you'll add a sentence or two to that, because I think it's so impactful to really getting people into the career pathways, into long-term jobs.
Thank you, Joe. And Kim, with the lens of looking at opportunities, certainly the work that you're doing and the workforce we have found has been impacted at all ages. And can you talk about some of the things as we're looking to have sustainability of our workforce, particularly those with disabilities and within our communities that are really dependent on wanting or needing to work later in life? Can you share some thoughts or recommendations or the priorities that we can do to support these efforts?
You're absolutely right, Nancy. It's a time of great opportunity, and part of that is because we're in the midst of and coming back from a great crisis. Folks may not know, although this community may well know that increasingly numbers of people are working later and later and later in life. About 1 in 6 people over 65 is still working, at least before the pandemic, and probably needed some accommodation, some inclusion to be able to keep working for that purpose, that income. Well, we know that there was huge unemployment has hit our state, high rates among older adults, even higher among Black and Asian older adults, in particular, Latino older adults. And of course, people had to keep working. Many of these folks were in essential work jobs and weren't able to telework. So we do have, as in so much from COVID, you could call it a perfect storm, but our secretary calls it an accelerator of change. What can we do to come out of this and build back better, as our forum is called? And I think there's 3 opportunities that we're looking at. I mean, the master plan came out in January and said, employment is everything. Employment is part of livable communities. Employment is part of inclusion and purpose. Employment is part of affording aging. Employment is part of direct caregiving. So we knew that employment was going to be at that heart, and we're working on 3 fronts. One, got to talk about the state budget, blockbuster budget from the governor, and there are specific workforce investments to expand our senior employment programs and keep up with the federal, with our state minimum wage at a minimum, but expand our employment slots for older workers. We also have investments in the direct care workforce, a workforce that both benefits older adults and people with disabilities and includes older adults and people with disabilities. So there is a lot of workforce investment in the budget we should all be watching. But outside of the budget, our administration is moving with many of you. We have the Olmstead Committee is now reborn as the Community Living Committee, co-chaired by Eric Harris here from Disability Rights California, and is really lifting up many of the themes of community living. We had our first meeting and so much more to come with his leadership. Our partners at the Workforce Development Board, we are working with them to include older adults as a priority population that local workforce boards would need to include. And again, that will help in alignment with people with disabilities drive inclusion. And as our governor mentioned in his video, California continues to be a leader, and Director Xavier has been a huge leader of this initiative so that California as an employer can do more to employ older adults and people with disabilities across the lifespan. And then the last thing I'll say, I'll just tracking very curiously is what telework is going to do for older adults and people with disabilities. I think that's the private sector, private employer opportunity that I'm very interested in. How does that make it easier for all of us to be together, to work in new ways? And how does it create new barriers? Both can be true. And so I think I'm really interested in working more with all of you and stakeholders and employers to see what do we want to carry forward from the COVID lesson of being on permanent telework, and what do we, so that we continue to be inclusion. I'll just say, I'm sure many of you, I love going to hearings at the Capitol now, and there's people testifying from all over the state who at late at night or early, who didn't have to travel all the way to Sacramento and give up a day to do that. So there are ways that the technology is fostering greater participation in civic life and employment, but there's also ways, again, it could create new barriers. So those are some of the opportunities I see, the budget opportunities, the Newsom leadership team, and our partners with all of you and the employment sector to build back better.
Hey, Nancy.
Yes, Joe, please.
Kim said something that I really want to pick up. I think it's really important for the audience to build into their conversation. So the whole shift to virtual, remote, digital, I think is a game changer in many ways, and it's something we have to be very thoughtful about. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm blind, so I have personal experience with this shift in technology. So we already mentioned the digital divide, but I think the digital divide carries a couple of other elements. We have a workforce that really has not developed in a sustainable way the skill set that you need to work remotely, and particularly people with disabilities. There's a different skill set that is needed. There is a whole range of technology that is needed to effectively do work remote, participate in panels remote, participate in education remote, participate in health, social, all of these elements that are now becoming very digitized and very tele, as Kim noted. But there's also the population that we are getting ready for work. How do we ensure that they're getting that skill set? Because their first job could be virtual and their first interview can be virtual, and it's not the same as face-to-face. But there's another aspect of this that I think is important. As people with disabilities, we have fought and will continue to fight for integration, for being at the table, for being included. And isolation is one of the biggest barriers that people with disabilities can face. So we need to be careful and thoughtful in the work that we're doing, that people with disabilities do not end up becoming isolated and segregated because, quote, telework becomes very convenient. The skill set that I need to leave my house, come to work, engage in public transportation, engage with my environment, is a skill set that cannot be lost. I'll need it for all other aspects of community living. So I think we have to embrace all that is going to be good and new about remote, and do so in a way that does not create a different set of isolation and segregation for individuals with disabilities.
Thank you, Joe. And really important awareness and being mindful, because as we look at all the great projects and initiatives that have preceded us, the things that we're currently implementing, one of the areas that I think is a particular challenge is how do we sustain that change? So we put forward different initiatives. And I'm going to ask Wesley, if you can give us a recommendation, what can departments or agencies do that can help keep change and forward moving that will really make a difference? What would you recommend?
Thank you, Ms. Bargman. Some people are not taught soft skills at school or home. Transition is a critical time. Our systems must get to people in high school before they end up in day programs and become stagnant. They need to reduce the hurdles in bureaucracy and span who they go to gather information. Our service providers and state agencies need to try to help people build confidence and develop interpersonal skills so people with disabilities from diverse backgrounds can understand how to get a job, hold a job, and conduct themselves in the workplace. It is intimidating to fill out applications and apply to schools. People need access to courses that help them to adapt to a workplace culture, learn how to work on time, and develop a work ethic. I took classes like this at American Job Center, and they helped me be successful. I practiced with mock interviews, how to shake hands, learn how to deal with others. Work is more than a job. It helps people with disabilities improve their quality of life. So I know a lot of people, it's been a very hard time for me personally too, because I lost my uncle. And there's a lot of people out there is unemployed, and we'll see what the future has for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wesley. And I'm so sorry for your loss. Heather, as Wesley shared, people have faced tremendous loss during this time. And as we do look at how do we affect change, we're having to make up, some of the progress that we had. And so how do we, what are the things, the strategies that you would recommend? Certainly the initiatives and the work groups that you have pulled together is remarkable and a great opportunity to affect change in our thinking. So how do we keep that going? How do we sustain that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nancy, and I want to sort of double back and I think talk about just a couple of things that several folks have mentioned, and one is one comment just in terms of just the age of transition in the state of California, which many of those of us on the call know that the federal sort of age is 16 years of age. The state of California currently has adopted that 16 years of age sort of standard as the age of sort of mandatory transition for our students. And, I think one of the areas in terms of policy, we could really look at and examine and really, what our alternative pathways to a diploma work group is really looking at is, like other states across the nation, dropping the age of transition to a much younger, meaning 14 and a half, as the earlier we can begin planning with students and families and communities and partner agencies outside of education, the better life outcomes we'll experience. I think that there is room for, I think, some significant, shifts, and certainly, excited to sort of work towards, a planning sort of transition pathway that is individualized, for all students. So, hopeful that in terms of the recommendations might land within the state of California. I mean, I reflect on my own daughter and think about, what parent or caregiver is, at 16 is sort of waiting at 16 and saying, okay, now what are we going to do, right? And so those conversations, we know, with most families and communities happens much earlier. So anyway, I wanted to plug that. But I think sort of sustaining, I think back to your question is really, we've got a number of work groups, and how do we sustain that momentum is really looking at those recommendations, and I think doing some strategic planning, right? Our state has received a significant influx of federal dollars, and how do we continue as a state agency to maximize those dollars with our system of, statewide system of support. Also across agency, but I think really being strategic about our investments and being careful about how are we spending our money, recognizing that, how we sort of secure and procure and decide and make decisions that impact real-time student families and communities is a reflection of our values, right, in our belief system. And so really ensuring that those two things, funding, values, beliefs, outcomes, goals, are aligned is certainly something that, when we make decisions, has to be part of the decision-making frame, so that we can plan with an eye towards, I think, sustainability. And I think really sort of the heart of the issue is really building sustainable systems, right? That can weather storms, that can weather pandemics, that can be flexible and nimble, and that really talk to one another as well. So, I think for us at CDE, really sort of stepping back and doing a scan of how are we spending our money? Is it really getting to the outcomes that we need to get to, and what shifts do we need to make to have a greater impact is something that state agencies, including CDE, engage upon quite regularly.
Thank you, Heather. So Olivia, you and I have had conversations about similar to what Heather was just sharing. And I know you know what I'm talking about as far as what are those opportunities early with families, and living and supporting families with their dreams, and support those dreams for their children. But also then to help kind of change that culture as we move along. I think just kind of tying those two things together. Can you share some thoughts and with the group? And I suspect that others will want to also share some thoughts on this one.
So I just want to really affirm what Heather laid out in terms of systems and what can be done to sustain some of the good work that has happened in the past. California has been very fortunate and has had a series of very strong, between the Promise Grants, the Project for National Significance and Employment Systems Change, Bridge Marriott's employment. It depends how old you are and how far you go back. But I think we've really been beneficiaries of a lot of important lessons learned. I had the opportunity to lead the Project for National Significance and Employment Systems Change. And I think one of the things we learned is that agencies need to be knowledgeable about one another's accountability systems, because that will support the change that needs to happen internally, and be able to communicate that to your fellow agencies so that the collaboration is really a deep collaboration, that you're both responding to what the charge is of your individual agencies, but you could also be more sort of generous and understanding of what your fellow agencies do collectively to advance employment. We spent a lot of time unpacking each of the agencies and what they were charged to do in their accountability systems as we made recommendations for best practices and laid the foundation for what I'm happy to say later became the Blueprint, California Blueprint for Competitive Integrated Employment. But I think, Nancy, what you were getting at is the whole issue around expectations and how important it is for families really to be brought to the table very early on, and that there needs to be a culture shift, I think, across the board in terms of expectations and opportunities for our youth as they develop. And I read a study very recently that 80% of physicians had low expectations in terms of the quality of life for people with disabilities. Well, some of the first systems that people, families and people with disabilities, children, youth, babies encounter is the health system. And so across the board, it's really critical that there is a view towards a promising, engaged, vibrant, enviable future for the individuals that we work with and envision planning out their futures. So I would really encourage that both there's representation at the table where people with where decisions are being made, and importantly that families are engaged very early in the process, and that information be provided in a very transparent manner so that when decisions are being made, they're doing it with the best information that's available. I don't know.
Thank you, Olivia.
I hope I got it what you were aiming for.
You did. And really, I think collectively, I'm hearing everyone say that, we need to work together, as agencies, departments, our community, listening to families, self-advocates, students. And so, Joe, can you share some recommendations or efforts that we can really lean into of how to collaborate? We, as two departments, we've been able to do that over the years and certainly right now. But again, looking at our other system partners, some thoughts on that?
Yeah, and first I'm going to do a very shameless plug here. And that is, when we talk about collaborating, one of the first things that we all need to appreciate is that most of us on this call are a business. Most of us hire. And every single one of us needs to look at our workforce and say, does it reflect the community of disabilities? And if not, what are we going to do about it? Because we cannot ask everybody else to if we don't. Now, to that end, Nancy, one of the things that I often use to drive the conversation around the systems alignment, coordination, collaboration is if we looked at any one individual as a whole, person-centered, and say they essentially have one plan. It's one person with one plan and one goal. And then the question becomes, what does each system bring to the table to help the individual from birth into a family sustaining wage, into aging with respect and dignity and the resources to do so effectively. It's not about pushing the responsibility off onto another system. It's not about taking another system's funding. It's about recognizing that there's not any individual who doesn't need services from across systems. And that individual really doesn't care who provides the services or how they're funded. All they're interested in is, how do I get from here into my future? And if we can come together and recognize that very basic principle of one person, one goal, one plan, doesn't need to be a piece of paper, doesn't need to be a statute. It's truly a mindset. And then align on that effort and say, this is how we map. Imagine, Olivia, going back to your comment, imagine the parents of an infant who are told about their child's disability. And imagine them having the understanding and the perspective that their child will go to work and will grow up in a society that is embracing of them, including the workplace, and saying, and here's a plan to help you and your child get from here to that point. Imagine the pressure it would lift off the child. Imagine the pressure it would lift off the family. And imagine how they might start to see possibilities and opportunities before them.
Thank you, Joe. And extremely well said as we're closing our panel. Really great challenge, but also reminder of how we can really make a difference. So I'm going to ask each one of you, just in closing, to just take a few words, and I'm going to ask Wesley to lead us off, if he doesn't mind. Is what is an important takeaway that you'd like those that are listening to this panel today, that is important that you would like to share with the audience? What's an important takeaway for your message today?
So important takeaway I would say is, do what you want to do. If you have a goal, go for it. If you have a dream, just go for it. And the person with a disability, what they say, what their preferences are is very important. I just want everybody to know that. So I don't know how the future is going to be, because we didn't know we're going to have a pandemic about 2 years ago. So I can't predict what the future is going to be like, but I'm going to try the best I can to help people out, to the best outcomes of their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wesley. And I'm right there with you. Let's do everything we can to help people have the best of their lives. Kim?
You know what I'm struck by in listening to this conversation is it's never too early and it's never too late.
Mhm.
By that, I mean that employment opportunities really do, as Heather so wisely said, and Joe said, begin at birth, at our very first conversations, our very first parenting. But they also, critical things happen at your 50s and 60s as well. And so just that lifespan, that lifelong lens on inclusion is really going to power us forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Heather?
Hi there, sure. I think similar to Kim, I think, for me, it's there's no perfect, there's no perfect time, and the time is perfectly now, if you want to say that. Like, this is our time. I think this is our moment. We have, I think, our community, I think, is really just committed, and sort of being a part of this conversation has just, I think, further energized me about really taking bold steps forward on, I think, reports from 5 or 6 years ago of things that have surfaced. And I think now is a time for California to really shift gears and get into, our other lane, and really sort of, push that gas and keep moving forward.
Thank you, Heather. I'm probably going to have to steal your line one day of the time is perfectly now. Olivia?
Well, I really echo the sentiments that have already been expressed, but I think as we move forward, one message I think is implied in all of the discussions we've had today, and what comes to mind is the word belonging, that no longer are we looking at what we're going to be doing on behalf of people or even with people, but the assumption is that in all of our work, beginning from cradle to grave, that there's a sense that people with disabilities and diverse individuals will be at the table, and that the systems we set up should reflect that expectation, that services and accommodations aren't necessarily asked for, they're provided as part of the fabric of what we do, and that we're already anticipating the people we expect to be at the table, whether it's in preschool, college, or in employment. And that's the sentiment I hope that we communicate in your efforts, certainly as leaders, and in my efforts in terms of the research, education, and training that we do.
Thank you, Olivia. And please, Joe, your thoughts?
The belief in the talent and potential of people with disabilities is everybody's job. Medical, social, education, workforce. And all of the readiness, all of the expectations only pay off when business, and business is anyone that makes a hire, when business makes the hire. So be an advocate, not just in the readiness, but be an advocate in the hire of individuals with disabilities.
Thank you, Joe. And Eric, Andy, thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to speak for the panel if they don't mind, to be able to be together to have this conversation. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to have the important discussion, and personally, thank you for letting me be a part of this esteemed group.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and to all the panelists for such a riveting discussion. We look forward to working with all of you as California builds back better. Thank you so much.